says, Esther chapter 10, all three verses.
Before I even start reading, can you tell me what name that is?
Just say Xerxes.
Okay. And the king Xerxes laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the sea, and all the acts of his power and of his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? How far do you want me to read?
Keep going, bro.
Okay. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Xerxes, and great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, and seeking peace upon all his seed.
Awesome.
Wait, that's it?
That's it, man. 3 verses.
Oh.
Chapter 10 is short. That's why we're doing it the way we're going to be doing it. So, okay, so we have, first section right here, Book of Esther. Verses 1 to 3, the tribute from the king. Basically, we've already went through this whole book. We know the journey that Mordecai has been through, the journey that Esther's been through, who this Haman guy is, and what's led up to this point. But basically, the king is using all of his might, all of his power, all of his greatness to send out tribute to all the land, all the isles around on the sea with his power and might to declare the greatness of Mordecai. Which is awesome because you think Mordecai has spent a lot of this book chilling at the king's gates, wearing sackcloth, throwing ashes all over his head, mourning in grief because of what might happen to him and his whole nation around him. But basically, the king's saying, hey, you saved me. You saved me. I remember that. It's written down in the Book of Chronicles. We're going to go through in a second and realize which chapter that is, where the king turns around and says, I want to bless the person who saved my life. And basically, things change from Mordecai at that point onwards. Right? But the king's saying, declaration all across the land, all across my provinces, the whole of the kingdom, across the sea, as far as my hand can extend, I'm going to send out a declaration to say how great Mordecai is.
Only as far as his hand.
Well, as far as, what they say, the mighty powers. He's got really long arms. And to make sure that all heard of these amazing things, the great things and the greatness of Mordecai. It was written in the Book of Chronicles, so when we go through the Book of Chronicles, we're going to read about Mordecai. It's going to be cool, and we'll be able to say, actually, that happened. We've read about this in Esther. We know why Mordecai is mentioned. This all connects, and it's another bit of proof and evidence of how the Bible is just so, connected up, in sync with one another, even though these people went around at those times. It's amazing. So Mordecai was second under the king only. He was accepted by all and wanted the best for all of his countrymen. It talks about the wealth. It says in verse 3 here, he was accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people and speaking peace to all his seed. He wanted peace, wealth, and just a good life for everyone after that. And that's amazing. But fundamentally, right at the end, that very last section is really good because he says, I just want peace to everyone who comes after me. Not even before, not even right now, but everyone following on. That's where I want to be. So that's chapter 10. Basically, it ends on a really good note, really nice note. Peace to everyone, but especially to the Jews. No more anger, no more hatred, no more lashing out. But there's obviously this whole story that leads up to that. There's this whole thing that happens. So we're going to go really quick overview of the book of Esther and finishing on that note of peace. Peace to all, wealth to his countrymen, and peace to his brethren and to his seed. Everyone who comes after him, his family line. Okay, so we've got chapter 1. We're just going to start right here. Chapter 1. Vashti introduced and then gone. Obviously, we're not going to read through every single chapter of this book because we've already done it. Okay, we've already done it before. If you haven't seen it, go back on our YouTube videos and look it up. They're all on there. But chapter 1, Vashti. Queen Vashti is introduced and then she's gone. It's pretty brutal. It's pretty fast. She had a real nice segment in the movie, but she didn't last really, This whole book starts with the reign of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces. That is, as far as his hand can stretch, Adam, over 127 provinces, and then further. Okay, he's trying to get this message out as far as he can. But this king liked to party. We were told about this, we read about this. He threw a big, lavish party that lasted over 180 days. It's a long time. It's a big party. And then when that party finished, they partied for a little bit longer. And then he invited all the big players and he invited all the small players in the province to come and party for another 7 days after that. 187 days, a long party. Stamina? I don't know. I don't know what else you say there. There's a lot of good food, a lot of drink, a lot of people, a lot of partying, a lot of talking, a lot of getting together. We can read in verse 9 in chapter 1 that Queen Vashti had a separate feast for all the women. So if you guys want to turn through your Bibles as I do and check that out, it basically is, I'm just going to be jumping through each of these verses and each of these sections just to make sure I'm not taking things out of context, just to make sure I'm keeping track of what we've already read. So verse 9 here, also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house, which belonged to King Xerxes. So the guys have all got their banquet going on, their big long party going on, and in a separate building across the way, the queen and the women are having their party there. Basically, it's separate. We need to remember that and that's a big thing. The king, in his drunken state, wanted to show off his queen and all of her beauty. To the party goers, to the multitude, to the crowd, to his friends, to his people he's hanging out with. He just wants to show her off, right? And in verse 12, it says, the queen does not show up. She refused to show up. So it says, Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burnt in him. Okay, so king set out and said, hey, queen, come on over. I want to show you off. I want people to see how good you look. And she's like, no, actually, I'm doing my own thing over here. I'm not coming. And he gets all type of angry. He gets all type of worked up. At that point on in chapter 1, we see the king push the queen out of the picture. And he does that by doing a few things that's kind of strange. He listens to people who have been drinking for a very long time. He asks people's opinions that have been around him for the last 187 days or whatever, wise men that he comes and calls wise. We don't know if they've been at the party or not. But we know that actually people talk to him and talk to him and talk to him about how this isn't just affecting you, king, this is affecting us as well. We need her out of the question. We need to clear it out of the way. Get a new queen. Kick her out. We don't want her anymore. So the king says, yeah, that sounds great. And he sends out letters to the kingdom of the role of men and women in the household to say, she stood up to me. She said, no, you can't let that happen. You can't let that happen. And I think that's the funny thing about this whole chapter. We get introduced to Queen Vashti, then she's kicked out. And then the king tries to put a stamp of authority by saying, this is how you should lead your household, the same way that I have. The woman must listen to the man, and this is the way. And if she doesn't, get her out. Be gone. And it's sad, because you think everything could have been a lot easier. It could have been a lot easier if the king didn't react out of emotion. If the king didn't react out of a drunken state. If he had allowed wise people to speak into his situation there instead of drunkards, surrounding yourself with wise people, surrounding yourself with good people, it's a really good idea. It's actually really important for you to do that. Seek good counsel from different people. Which leads to this section right here. The king's reacting out of emotion. We see the emotional response from the king to react to what people around him are saying. Those people in a drunken state. Okay? And basically it comes from that point there that we see Esther. So Esther's not in the first chapter at all. Mordecai is not mentioned in the first chapter at all, but they're two key players in the rest of the book. So we're going to jump to chapter 2. The search for a new queen, Queen Esther. So after the wrath of the king had subsided, after he had cleared out Vashti, he remembered the previous queen and was like, remember what happened there? I don't want that to happen again, so I want to find a young, beautiful virgin to come take her place in the palace in Shushan. The virgin that pleased the king will be the new queen. Okay, she's got to be beautiful. She's got to know her place. She's got to be a virgin. There's your three things right there. And this is how it's going to work. We are introduced in chapter 2 to Mordecai, the son of Jair, who was a Benjamite. And we can read the history of Mordecai in verse 6. So I'm going to go to chapter 2, verse 6 here. And it said, Mordecai, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. A lot of carrying away here. Basically, people taking over people, getting taken over by people. And we have Nebuchadnezzar, who was mentioned in a previous book we studied through, Book of Daniel, King Nebi, right? And basically, there's a crossover in a lot of these places. We've got Chronicles, we've got Daniel, we've got a few more different situations going on in here, like ties to Ruth as well, which is awesome. Again, just crossovers in the Bible that tell us that this thing is true, which is incredible. So Mordecai was carried away and was part of that whole takeover from King Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe his family was bought as slaves, maybe they were used in different situations like that. But we find out that Mordecai brought up Esther. Esther lost her mum and dad. She was an orphan, and he said, you know what, I'm gonna raise you. You're gonna be part of my family. So he adopts her into the family. And she's a beautiful maid. Verse 8 tells us, so it came to pass when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace, to the custody of Haggai, that Esther was brought also into the king's house, to the custody of Haggai, keeper of the women. So you got Haggai or Hegai, or however you want to say it. He's basically the guy that's watching out for all the maidens, for all these virgins, so that they can't be touched, so they can't be influenced. They're the most beautiful. It is like a beauty show, and it's whoever pleases the king the most gets to be the next queen. Imagine that as your next big show on TV. Introducing the next queen, and you got like these beautiful women, and they walk in, and they, well, tell us about yourself. Well, I'm this person, I come from here. It's like that. They're interviewing to be the next queen. Grand prize, you get to rule over 127 provinces with King Xerxes himself. Not a bad prize, huh? But these other virgins were all gathered up, and Esther was included in that as well. The keeper of the women, a man called Haggai, was kind to Esther and showed favor to her, which is awesome. It's already God's hand in there. But remember, God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. So Esther had not shared that she was a Jew. Mordecai had told her to keep that info to herself. Don't tell people about that yet. But Esther found favor with the king, and she was chosen to be the new queen. Okay. All the while, I think, we've got Mordecai. Mordi saves the king is this next section. All the while, Mordecai saves the king from this plot when two of the king's chamberlains want the king dead. He steps in, he spoils the plot, he saves the king's life, and it's like, wow, this guy is awesome. And then nothing else is said of it. Nothing else is said of it. We get to chapter 3. The promotion, the plot, and the purr. Okay? We see the promotion of Haman, second only under the king. And then we see the wrath of Haman as well. Okay? Surrounded by people constantly reminding him of what Mordecai didn't do. So we can read in chapter 3. After these things, so after the saving, after the new queen's been chosen, after the banquet with Vashti's kicked out of the way, after all these things, Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, has promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set him in his seat above all the princes that were with him. He is second to the king. He's high up now. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not. And that's where the promotion has happened. Promotion of Haman. Out of nowhere, out of the blue, this is the guy, he's going to lead under me, he's second to me only. And he's surrounded by people constantly reminding him that Mordecai did not bow to you. That's kind of sad. I can remember teaching this and saying, imagine that every single day you get bumped in the shoulder by a guy, and then your friends, and you're like, it's fine, it's nothing. And the next day your friends are like, did you remember that guy shoving you in the shoulder? He was so aggressive, he said some stuff to you, he made it even worse. And then the next day, can you remember? And you're like, by the end of the week, you're like, yeah, it was nothing, but actually it's something now. I'm really frustrated about this. I'm really fired up. And that's kind of what happened. These people that Haman had surrounded himself, kind of like the king, bad, not wise people, kept reminding him, he didn't bow to you. He didn't show respect to you. Remember how he didn't do that? I'm sure he said some stuff as well while she was standing there. I wonder if we can find out if he did. We don't know if he said Mordecai said stuff, but you know what? People like to stir the pot. That's just the way that people do things. So he was told that Mordecai was a Jew. So obviously, instead of being second in command and saying, hey, I have the power to call you into my presence, he says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to wipe them all out. Just going to get rid of them all. I'm angry, I'm frustrated. So there was this whole plan. So we've got the promotion of Haman. Now we've got the plot or the plan to wipe out the whole Jewish people in the kingdom. So then they cast pur, which is basically casting lots. We see that at the foot of the cross with the soldiers trying to get Jesus' clothes. So we've got the promotion, the plot, and the pur. And basically it was to decide the day of execution, the day, the month, when this is going to happen. And verse 13... in chapter 3 there tells us the letters were sent by post into the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. So basically, we are getting told that they've cast these lots, they've rolled these dice, and it's landed on the 13th day of the 12th month. And there was a plot, a chosen date to wipe out all the Jews. Haman even offered a ridiculous amount of money to those who would help kill the Jews. It wasn't even his money to offer. He was like, hey, the king's going to pay you big money to help wipe these guys out. You in? Of course you're in, because everyone loves money. Everyone wants to get paid. This is how you're going to do it. And the king agreed so much that he gave his very own signet ring, handed it over to Haman. Gave his stamp of approval, his signature, the king's very signet ring, to basically say, go for it. Green light, green light, green light, let's go. And the decree was agreed upon. It was signed and sent out in all the languages of all the provinces so everyone would understand, this is from the king, this is approved, this is agreed upon, and this is going to happen. And at the end of chapter 3 here, we read that the king and Haman enjoy a drink, while all of the city of Shushan are just perplexed, are just confused about what's going on. Then we jump into chapter 4. Mordecai asks for Esther's help. And there's a really good reason for this, because Mordecai is a Jew. That's how he's been introduced the whole time. Mordecai is a Jew. Esther's a Jew, but no one knows that yet. But Mordecai is specifically identified as Mordecai the Jew. So in this chapter we find Mordecai desperate. He's ripped his clothes. He's replaced them with sackcloth, that heavy, dense animal hair. It's really dark. It's really heavy. You wear it when you're mourning, when someone has died in your family, and this is how people know that you're just not over it yet. I'm going to wear this. I'm going to go to a fire pit. I'm going to find ashes. I'm going to throw it into the air. I'm going to rub it into my hair, rub it into my beard, and walk around crying, wailing, mourning. And this is how you know that I'm not in an okay state. Imagine if people did that nowadays. Instead of just putting on a fake mask, today was a great day. Facebook status. Today was an awesome day. It's like, no, it wasn't. It was terrible. Mordecai was just being honest back then. I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful for honesty in that situation. But how hard would that be? Why is your clothes ripped? I had a really bad lunch. Why is there ash in your hair? I was having a bad day. You know, you come back and people just look at you and be like, it's kind of weird. But instead what we do nowadays is we mask all of that stuff with a false social media presence or a smile saying, oh, how you doing, guys? Yeah, good. How about you? Oh, yeah, this is great. We're perfect. Where inside you're kind of like, no, life's terrible. And remember what we learned from chapter 4 was actually it's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry out. It's okay to show your emotions. God hears them all. God heard the Jews crying out. God hears Mordecai crying out. God hears you guys crying out. God hears me crying out, which I'm really thankful for. So, he was waiting at the king's gates. Anyone, if you're going to be in the presence of the king, you can't look like that. You're not allowed to look like that. So he had to wait on the king's gate. He was technically Esther's dad, adopted into the family. But you know, he's not allowed to see Esther anymore. He's not allowed to do that. He saved the king's life, but he's not allowed to be in the presence of the king. He's excluded. He's pushed out. And there was a kingdom-wide weeping, fasting, wailing, and mourning from all the Jews, all across all the provinces. And I can imagine they were wearing sackcloth and throwing ash around and walking around wailing and moaning as well in grief, because that's how you showed it back then. And Esther heard from her maids and was grieved, and she sent some new clothes for Mordecai and said, hey, get dressed and so you can come in front of the king and you can tell him your story, you can tell him what's going on. And he's like, no, I'm not okay. I'm not just going to fake it. I'm not just going to put on a nice suit so I can step in front of someone. I'm mourning right now. This is an important thing to do. And again, we realize it's okay to show emotion. It's okay to do that. Mordecai did it, and he stayed on the outskirts for a while, showing that emotion. We're allowed to do it. But then Mordecai then told Esther's servants all that is happening, this big plot, this big plan, what's going to happen to the Jews. But on top of that, he didn't just say it with his words and say, believe my words. He hands her a copy of the decree and say, here's the proof. Here's how I know it's real. Look at that signature. Look at that stamp of approval. That's coming right from the king. Isn't he your husband? Oh, this is awkward. He's trying to kill all of your people, all of your family line, all of us. Don't just listen to my words. Here's the proof, right? Save my people, save the Jews, save yourself, Esther. But Esther's response of not knowing if she would live or die if she went into the presence of the king, as he hadn't called on her for like 30 days, she's saying, I don't know if I'm even allowed to be in there. I haven't heard from him in like a month. And Mordecai's response is great. Don't think of yourself here. There is more at stake. Even if you don't go in and do this, there will still be redemption through something else. It says in verse 14, and this is one of my favorite verses in the whole of the book of Esther. And it's kind of funny, but it says, if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then there shall enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. It's like, if you're not the answer to this, you know what? God's going to bring something else. If you're not going to do this, you know what? Okay, I'm going to be delivered by something else instead. And I love that. I love that faith. I love that honesty from Mordecai to say, actually, I'm willing to say that this is going to happen, that this is going to be different. And whether it's you helping in this deliverance, God's going to provide. Whether you're the right person or not, God's still going to provide. But again, remember, God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. He's saying there's going to be deliverance, but we're not saying it's from God. We're saying, I don't know, something's going to happen. But he's confident that something's going to happen. I love that. But you know what? If this doesn't happen this way, you and your father's house will be destroyed. You and your whole family line will be destroyed. All of the Jews in the kingdom will be destroyed. And think, Esther, have you come into this kingdom, into this position, into this throne, into this place, into this authority for any other thing, maybe for such a time just like this, right now? And he's basically saying to her, maybe this is why you're here. Maybe this is why you've been put in this place to do this thing, to save these people, to step into this at this time. Maybe this is how redemption can be fulfilled. Esther responds, well, if I'm going to do it, pray. Get everyone to pray. Get everyone to fast. I don't want to go on my own. I need support. And this is the difference here. Go and ask people to pray for me. Go and ask people to fast. Let's not just make a snap decision. Go and do that, and then I'll make my decision. She's willing to wait. She's not making a snap decision in an emotional state or in a drunk state. She's willing to wait. Mordecai is saying, do it, let's go, let's push forward this plan. And she's saying, let's take a breather for a second. Get people to pray for me, fast, spend some time doing this, then I'll do it. Then we'll see what happens. If you do this, and I will do it, and then if I perish, I perish. She's willing just to say, you know what? If I step in there after you've prayed and after you've fasted and I still die, okay, I die. That's okay. But I know it's been done the right way. So then we jump into chapter 5, the banquet. Lots of the Bible going on in here, which is good. Let's find out that page again. There we go. So on the third day, Esther put on her royal clothes. So there, third day. 3 days have gone. There's been praying, there's been fasting, there's been waiting. It's not an emotional response. It's not a drunken response. It's a response that has been worked through, prayed for, and fasted on. And that's a really good response to have. She put on her royal clothes, she put on her crown, she went all through the stuff, got her nice necklaces on and earrings on probably, got her ready herself to go and see the king, and she walked and stood in the inner court of the king's house. Just getting herself in that position where she could be killed for even stepping into that place without permission. The king saw Esther standing there, and he gave favor to her. Just as he could have turned around and said, kill her, she's not allowed in here, he said, okay, I'll talk to her. And that's an amazing thing. Who guided the king to make that decision? Who made his heart soft for Esther in that moment? We don't know because God's not mentioned here, right? But we know that God does a lot of these things, right? He moves and works in different ways. So Esther drew near and touched the king's scepter, the big stick that he's holding on to. And the king asks, what's Esther's request? What do you want? And she answers, if it seems fit, then the king and Haman should come and have a banquet. Come and have a banquet. Come and spend some time with me. Come and eat some food. That's all it is. It's just a banquet. That's all I want. Just want to see you. Husband, come on. Let's go eat some food together. I don't know. Verses 4-9 tells us about how basically she wants to get this banquet done and getting Haman to come along as well as the king. But verse 9 says this, and then went Haman forth that day joyful for the invite to the banquet. He's just had his invite. He's joyful about it. Get to go eat some food with the king. Esther's there as well, but the king, want to suck up to that guy a little bit more? Let's do that. And with a glad heart, and when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, looking all droopy, looking a little bit gloomy, he stood up, not moved for him, and he was full of indignation against Mordecai. He was angry again. I'm furious. I want this guy killed. How can he not stand up for me again? How can he not show respect to me again? He didn't bow the first time, and now this time he's not standing for me? Come on! There's anger. There's frustration going on. Haman restrained himself from attacking Mordecai, went home and called for his friends and for Zeresh, his wife, and Haman bragged. Why not? That's a good response. Full of food, had a good time with the king, had a nice little banquet. I'm going to brag. I'm going to brag about my riches. Did you know I'm second under the king? Did you know how rich I am now? Have you seen these clothes? Have you seen the signet ring? Come on. Have you seen my sons? I've got many of them. I'm so good. Look at me. Me. Right? And on top of that, Esther only invited me and the king for this banquet. Just me and the king. Must be so special. And with all this gloating, all of this bragging about his life, we actually realize that Haman, he's not happy with life. He's not happy with it going on because he's constantly reminded of this guy that doesn't show him respect. He's constantly reminded of Mordecai, who did not bow when he got his promotion. He did not stand up as he walked through past the king's gate. We find out that in verse 13, Haman's been complaining about seeing Mordecai. So again, he says, yeah, all this avail me. So all of the things I have, all the things I've just bragged about, all the things I've just talked about, everything, all of this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. None of it matters if he's still sat there. Whew, okay, well then why did you just tell us about it? Doesn't matter, that guy's still alive. He's still drawing breath, I need him gone. All the things I have, all the stuff I have, yet I'm frustrated about the existence of Mordecai, the Jew. So the obvious solution suggested by Haman's wife, obvious solution, and his friends, is to get a giant pointed pole, stick it 50 cubits into the sky, and hang Mordecai from the stabby bit at the end. Makes perfect sense, right? You know, don't put him into prison. Don't get rid of just Mordecai who's bugging you. Try and kill all the Jews. And on top of that, use him as a great example about why you need to get back in line. Crazy. Gallows 50 cubits high. A big old pointed sharp stick pointed straight up. Scott, can you remember how tall that was?
About 75.
About 75 feet. Straight up. And you get chucked onto that stabby bit, there ain't no coming down from that. How's it going, bud?
How do you put a dude up there?
You know, some sort of like scaffolding or something like that to get up
There's
there?
actually several ways they do it. It's very unpleasant.
There you go. I can imagine it would be done quite close to a taller building and it would be dropped out, but you know, I don't even want to know because it'd be nasty anyway. So basically, Haman's talking and he's bragging, and his wife is saying, "Now I'm gonna give you some ideas." And they're like, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's get these gallows." Now I'm so happy because I'm thinking all of my troubles, all of my frustrations are going to be hanging 50 cubits in the sky, 75 foot in the sky, so I don't even have to worry about it anymore. I'm not going to see him anymore unless I look up. But you know what? It'll put a smile on my face. Haman's kind of messed up. You know, like, Haman's got some problems. And Haman thought, you know what? That sounds, wife of mine, friends of mine, that is a fantastic idea. We're just going to go with it. We're just going to get them commissioned. Why not? Let's get a big pole, put it into the sky and use it. Let's do this. So he gets it done. End of chapter 5. We jumped into chapter 6 here. The king honors Mordecai. We read right at the start of chapter 6. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. So you have that. You have the king, he can't sleep, so what's he going to do? He's going to read a book, or at least get a book read to him. Okay? So the book of Chronicles is brought in, and it tells him of this whole plot to kill the king and how Mordecai stopped it. Mordecai was the one that saved his life. And the question of what was done for him was asked. The king basically turns around and says, "Oh, well, what happened? What honor and dignity have been done to Mordecai for this?" This is verse 3. And the king's servants that ministered unto him said, "There's nothing done for him." Actually, what happened in chapter 2 is he saved your life. Chapter 3, opening line, you promote Haman. It's like nothing has happened for him to say thank you. Cue Haman in the courts, hanging out on the inner courts, waiting for the king, maybe snooping around. What's going on, king? What's going on? And the king calling on someone to help. In comes Haman to the rescue. I'll help you, king. I'm here. And the king asks this question in verse 6. What shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? And Haman thought in his heart, you know what? He's talking about me. I've delighted the king. He wants to honor me. I'm amazing. I've done such good things. He wants to honor me. I'm going to get what I can get out of this. So, what shall be done for this person who delights the king? So, Haman instantly thinks that the king is talking about him because why wouldn't he? Right? Why wouldn't you? Let the royal clothes be worn by this person, king. That would be a good start. I want to wear the king's robe. Yeah. Actually, I want to ride on the king's horse, the royal horse. Yeah, that'd be great. I love my friends to be able to see that. And you know what? Actually, I want to be led around by one of your princes or one of your higher ups all the way around the kingdom, because that'd be really cool. People will see how good I am. They've got to sing my praises as we walk around and announce me to everyone. It's gonna be amazing for my ego and for my appearance. It's gonna be great. And the king's response is, "Wow, that's a great idea. Of course, that sounds fantastic. Run and get the clothes ready, and then get the horse ready, and do it for Mordecai the Jew." It's like, go get the clothes ready. Oh, this is going to be great. And get the horse ready. Yeah, we must get the horse ready, because I can't wait. Oh, for Mordecai. What? But what about me? And you can see, I wish you could see Haman's face at that point when he's realizing he's not the guy getting the reward here. You know, he wasn't even mentioned back in chapter 2 when Mordecai saved his life. But make sure it is all done for the one who delights the king the most. Don't miss a beat. Everything you just said, Haman, make sure it's done and done well. So Haman had to lead Mordecai the Jew through the kingdom on the king's horse, in the king's clothes, with the crown on, and Haman had to lead him and call out praises. Here comes the most great Mordecai, savior of the king, one who foiled the plot. And you can imagine the embarrassment of Haman of saying, this guy didn't bow to me. This guy didn't stand for me. This guy showed me no respect. And now I have to sing his praises for the whole kingdom to hear? And it's coming from the second in command, only under the king. Remember how he bragged? Bit of a slap in the face. And verse 12 tells us that Haman said, moreover, hold on a second, wrong chapter, there we go. There we go. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. He arrived back on the king's gate on the horse, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning and having his head covered. I don't want to be seen, I don't want to be seen, I don't want to be seen. I'm so sad. Right? They've just done this huge celebration. Haman then went to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So he's just run back and he's just done what the king's asked, and he's just covered his head up and he's so ashamed, and he's like, it's okay, we've got a banquet to go to next, and it's going to be great because it's just me, Esther, and the king, and it's going to be awesome. We're going to eat some food, and we're going to have me and the king are going to be best friends forever. We can get over it. Chapter 7. Haman is fed, then hung. Okay. The king, Esther, and Haman all gather for this banquet that Queen Esther had prepared. And the king asks this question to Esther, what is your petition, Queen Esther? What do you want? What's going on? And it shall be granted. How funny is that? That question right there. What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed. King doesn't even know what she's asking for. We went through this when I taught chapter 7 there. I think I said basically at that point in time, I'd be like, yeah, I want to tell you about Haman, but first I really want the new PlayStation. Because if it's going to happen, I just want it, right? My horse has been running out of gas really fast. Need a new model. You know, like, I don't know. Just think about that for a second. But Esther responds in verses 3 and 4. Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given at my petition, and my people at my request. If I lose my life, I lose my life. But no, I'm willing to do that so you hear this. So you hear what I'm saying. It's serious. This isn't a joke. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. If we were going to be slaves, I'd have kept quiet. If we were going to be sold into servanthood, I wouldn't have said a thing. But we're going to die. We're going to be destroyed. We're going to have our lives ended. I need you to know this. Save my people. And the king's response, who is he and where is he? Who that dost presume in his heart to do so? Who is this guy that wants to kill you? And where is he? I'm gonna... You kind of go, hold on a second, king. The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. That's verse 6 for you. He's right here in our banquet. He's right here next to you, stuffing his face with the prawn cocktail or whatever. That guy. He's like, me? Yeah, that guy. That guy. He didn't get meat sweats because he was dead. Okay. Haman was then afraid, it says. He was fearful before the king and the queen because he knew the jig's up. Uh-oh. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, the king was angry, went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that it was evil determined against him by the king. He saw it in the king's eyes, oh, this isn't going to end well for me right now. I might be second under the king, but things aren't going to be good for this. I see how this movie ends, right? And in that time, Haman arose, got up to his feet to beg, to plead with Esther for his life. Please save me, please. He doesn't know that Esther's a Jew. But she would have just said, if we were sold into slavery, if we were sold as servants, I would have kept my mouth shut. Maybe he's not putting one and one together to make two here, because things are going pretty fast for Haman right now. And he saw that evil was meant against him by the king. And the king returned back into the banquet of wine. So it says in verse 8, the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine. And Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Remember, we talked about the bed. It wasn't a bed. It was kind of one of those reclining couches. Everyone likes to lay down whilst they eat their food. Why not? And basically, you're not allowed inside the king's courts without being given permission. Why on earth would you think you can touch the queen or come near her without the king's permission? You're laying on my queen's couch? You're begging her, talking to her exclusively about saving your life? You're talking to my wife, the queen? Oh, Haman. Oh, Haman, what's going on here? And the king saw this, and he says, basically, who will he force the queen also before me in this house? Will he force you to do something in this house before me? Will he come in between me and you as well? Will he do things that I don't agree with later on? And as he says this, he basically said to the servants, get him out of here. We're done here. Haman is done. He's had his time. It's filled. The king saw this. The servants covered Haman's face. They covered the face so that the king would not see a convict's face again. You're a criminal. I don't want to see you again. They covered the face so that it would show that Haman's life was over. There's no redemption from this. Light into complete darkness. You don't get to see what's happening next. They led him out and they hanged Haman on the gallows that had been prepared for Mordecai. 75 feet in the air. Bird food. And the wrath of the king was pacified. That's verse 10, the final verse of chapter 7 now. We jump to chapter 8. The Jews can defend themselves. And this sounds funny because Haman's decree was still going forward, right? We already know this from Daniel. Anything that is written by the king cannot be overturned because it's written by the king. It's signed by his signet ring. It's put in play. So how do you counter a decree that cannot be undone? Well, you write a new decree. And Haman's decree was going forth. It's coming up to that day of execution, a day of elimination for all the Jews. And the king's like, we need to write a new decree. And Mordecai and Esther's like, let's write it and say that the Jews can defend themselves. That's what needs to happen here, king. That's what needs to happen so they can stand up and live. So the house of Haman, first of all, was handed over to Queen Esther. And Esther told the king that Mordecai was in fact involved in all of this. He wasn't just there to save your life. He was petitioning from the king's gates, whilst mourning, in despair, weeping, asking to save the Jews. He's been there from the start. He's the guy. And then the ring of the king, the signet ring again, was handed over to another person. So the first time it was Haman, the second time it's been a Mordecai. The ring that basically had the little stamp that approved everything to go ahead. And Esther spoke again and fell down at the king's feet and cried and wept and said, put away the plan of the mischief that Haman had devised. Reverse it, basically. Change it, king. And he's like, I can't. You can't change something that the king's written into a decree. But what we can do is we can write a decree of our own. So the king allowed Esther to touch the golden scepter, allowed her to stand in front of the king and make a new decree for the Jews. Her and Mordecai put their brains together and said basically what needs to happen in the king's name with the signature of the king, they need to be able to stand up and defend themselves. They need to be able to live. So the servants and the scribes wrote a new decree according to all that Mordecai had said. And the new decree went out over all the kingdom, in all the languages, into all the provinces, all 127 provinces. And verse 11 of chapter 8 here tells us basically what they can do. So it says, wherein the king granted the Jews that were in every city to gather themselves, to bring themselves together, and to stand for their lives, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them. That's the same language that Haman used in his decree. To destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish. Mordecai is using exactly the same words that Haman's done, has written into his decree, for the Jews to stand up and bless you.
Thank you.
All the power of the people in the province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Basically, defend yourself. Don't just defend yourself. Don't just stop them from hitting you. Kill them. And once you kill them, you can take their property as yours. It's now yours. Just like Haman had said before. How's it going?
Wait, but they don't do it though.
They don't. Yeah. Spoiler alert. Thanks for that.
Sorry.
No, you're good. But good memory. They don't do it. Why? Because it's not about personal gain. It's about saving their lives, right? So, there's a new decree put out there to defend themselves against those who want to kill them. And we read that Mordecai came out of the presence of the king in the king's quarters there in royal clothes, in great colors, with a great crown. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. And the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor upon them. That's what it says. That's amazing. And in every province where the king's commandments were read, there were feasts of joy and of gladness. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Okay, that's chapter 8. Chapter 9, we have the Jews are victorious, also the feast of Purim. So on the same day that the destruction of the Jews was going to happen, the 13th day of the 12th month, that's when Haman wanted to happen. Go for it.
Where verse 17 says, and many of the people of the land became Jews.
Yeah.
So they joined the other team.
Yeah. People were converted. Yeah. It's a big deal, right? And Wes taught on chapter 8, and he did a really great job of explaining just what that meant and what that sacrifice meant back in those times. So if you get a chance to look at that video, do it. But it's really amazing to think all these people have been mourning and weeping and wearing sackcloth and throwing ash around and just being in a sad state. And yet, when they come to feasting and being happy and joyful and glad, that's what people see. And then they're like, wow, we should do what they're doing. Because that seems like a better life to live. Right? So on the same day that the destruction of the Jews was going to happen due to Haman's decree, the 13th day of the 12th month, the Jews were given permission to stand up for themselves. The day went from death to life, from destruction to salvation. And then Esther asked for an extension. We need more time to get rid of all the people who are against them. We need more time so that the Jews continue to defend themselves. So it went on for 2 days. Thousands were killed. Adam, we did the math. There's plenty of thousands. It was like 75,000, something like that were killed, right? Yeah. And in that huge number were Haman's 10 sons. And they hung Haman's 10 sons from the gallows. Pretty aggressive. And in this time, Mordecai's fame kept growing greater and greater. And the Feast of Purim was set up so that the Jews would remember all that had happened in this time. Letters went out to all the provinces and all the languages and all the kingdom to tell the Jews how to remember, what to do. How do you do this feast? Why have we got this feast? Why are we doing this thing? Verse 28 tells us just the extent of how much they should be trying to remember. And that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city. And that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. Basically, you need to remember what's happened here. You need to remember because it's important. We understand where God's brought us from. But remember, God's not mentioned in the book of Esther, so we can't say God. But you remember that we've been saved by something who's brought us through all these trials. It is God. It's God. So it's good. But anyway, it was important. So please remember it. And that's the key thing here. Remembering what God has done for us, for you guys in your lives. We need to be able to look back and see how God has been active in our lives. Because He is, even in the smallest way. So, that is, first of all, the 10th chapter of Esther, the 3 verses right at the very start. But then a whole overview, a very quick overview, which I've left out a lot of detail. And if you guys want more detail, you go back and you can watch the videos on YouTube. You can check them out and you can make notes on your own. But it's really important that we look at why the king's tribute was such a big deal and what happened and what caused this reaction from the king. Okay? Does anyone have any extra thoughts before I do my final 3 points here? Anyone got anything do you want to add? No? Robin, you got anything? Scott, you got anything? Okay. There's quite a lot tonight, so I apologize, but I just wanted to kind of overview if we had a chance, because there's only 3 verses in chapter 10, but I've got 3 final points for you here. So the first one, do you remember the trials that God has brought you through? This is one of the ones I used before, but it is really important that we're able to look at our lives and think, man, that time sucked. But you know what? God was there for me. God pulled me through. Yeah, that time was really hard and really challenging, but you know what? God was there, and I can see that in this situation. remembering the trials doesn't just mean you stay in that bad place and that sad place. Remembering the trials means you understand the challenge and where God has put you at now, considering where you were before. The journey from A to B, that could be really tricky in between, but God got you through it. Just think about that. Do you remember the trials that God has brought you through? Second point here, what have you learned from the book of Esther? What have you learned? For me, faith. That favorite verse of mine of saying basically, if it doesn't come from you, deliverance is going to come from somewhere. God's going to deliver somehow, someplace, somehow. I don't understand it. It might not be through your actions, Esther, but you know what? He's going to come through for me. That pure faith, that confidence. I learned that from this book. I loved it. I've really enjoyed teaching from Esther. I know Scott and Wes has as well. But you know what? Your understanding of the book of Esther, what have you guys taken out of it? If you kind of breeze through and not really listen to this book, and I really encourage you to read it on your own and take some notes. Because even in trying times, we see how to react as a follower of Jesus. That it's okay to show emotion. That it's okay to spend time down in the dumps crying, changing your clothes to sackcloth and throwing ash around and just weeping and moaning and it's okay. That's not frowned upon. And you know what? Mordecai's response from Esther when she says, put on some new clothes. He's like, I'm not ready. No, I don't want to. I'm in this position and I'm not ashamed of it. I know who I'm clinging to. I know why I'm upset. I know why I'm sad. It's a reason. It's not just an excuse. What have you learned from Esther? What have you learned from the book of Esther? Third point here. Sometimes it isn't obvious where God is in the situation. We've said this a couple of times. I've said it a couple of times tonight. God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. But it is obvious where God's hand was in the book of Esther. Right? God guided Queen Vashti out of the way, and Queen Esther into rule. God guided Mordecai to be able to stop that plot of the death of the king. God managed to basically guide and instruct and place his hand where it needed to be to save the Jews and to use Esther as a huge role in that. God is in the book of Esther, but sometimes it's really not obvious. Sometimes it's really hard to see where God is in your life, in your situation right now. I promise you he's there. You just need to look and be able to trust and have that confidence to say, if it's not right now through this way, through this deliverance, it's going to be through something else because I know God comes through for me. Okay? Those are my 3 points today. Do you remember the trials that God has brought you through? What have you learned from the book of Esther? And sometimes it isn't obvious where God is in a situation, but he's there, I promise. We're going to pray, but I've really enjoyed teaching through the book of Esther. It's been a lot of fun.